Welcome. It's the top of the hour, and we're really thrilled to have you all join the Signed with Love, the real world truth about prenups and postnups. And I'm thrilled to be joined by my two panelists. My name is Dr. Kirby Rosplock. I'm the host of the Tamarind Learning podcast, CEO and founder of Tamarind Learning and Tamarind Partners. And today we're talking prenups.
Hi there.
Torri, do you want to introduce yourself and David?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in. I am Torri Hawley. I'm Chief Learning Officer of our US division here at Tamarind Learning. And I'm really excited to be here today to share my personal story as a beneficiary and a Rising Gen member with my prenups, because prenup, singular, married ones. So there's a lot to learn, and I'm excited to share that with our audience today.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm David York. I'm an attorney and CPA in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I work with clients in tax and estate planning, um, really with clients all over the U.S. and had a lot of clients and a lot of experiences with premarital agreements, or at least discussions of premarital agreements. So I'm looking forward to talking with Kirby and Torri both about their experiences and ways that people can think about this topic as they move, uh, as this comes up from in their lives.
So, just a little disclaimer. Yes, David is an attorney, CPA, but we are not providing legal advice, tax advice, or consulting you, telling you how you should do this or not do this. We are just here to share our stories, provide education. And because we are sharing our personal stories, we really appreciate the attendees today respecting that personal aspect. And please don't quote or republish or share this information outside of sort of the sanctity of this group. So, again, thank you so much for all being here. We're really excited to dig in. Maybe to get going, because we have quite a few people now on the call, maybe it would be interesting to do a quick poll to get your perspective. So I'm going to launch a poll right now. And please just take a moment. There's no right or wrong answers here. The first question is, how frequently do you see nuptial agreements coming up? And the second question is, in your opinion, at what age or stage should someone be educating about a prenup? And the last question, who ideally benefits more from a prenup? So again, the first one's really what you're observing. The second one's kind of what's your opinion on it. And again, another opinion at the end. And I'm just going to leave this open for a few minutes because we have a lot of people responding, and I really appreciate your feedback because I think this also sets the tone of this call today.
Yeah, definitely. We want to use the poll responses and encourage folks to reply because I think it'll give us sort of a starting place in our conversation. So we're going to share our personal experiences, but we're also tackling this through education, right? So being able to sort of speak to, what people are seeing, whether that's we think that talking about it at engagement or in high school, we can really sort of guide the conversation on what we experienced, as well as what shows up in our two courses and our modules that are attached to purposeful prenups and doing things intentionally.
So we've got about 72% who participated. If you're just joining the call, please jump in and join our poll. It's anonymous, it's aggregated. We don't know what you're responding, but we'd love to be able to reflect that in the findings of this call today. I'll leave it go for another 10, 15 seconds, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, what's really interesting, right, is there's no nevers here. So this is not showing up for anybody, right? So we're seeing that this is common. It's part of why we launched this course with Emily, is because we were seeing it as a huge point of education and insecurity for the individuals going through this, for the couples going through this, as well as the advisors that support them. And this comes up in your work a lot, right, David? People don't know necessarily what to do around prenups.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's maybe one of the more loaded terms we even use when it comes to estate planning as a whole. because people have different perceptions of it, whether we call them prenups or postnups or premarital agreements or not. They're really just agreements, written legal agreements between parties in a relationship, and that can seem a little anathema, right? Sounds like a love contract, but what is a marital agreement? When do we use it? It is certainly one of those that comes at the confluence of family or relationship and money, and those can be deep waters. And you may also have people who come in with very different understandings or expectations. You might come from a high net worth family where premarital agreements were talked about when you were a kid, and suddenly or you might be someone who comes from a middle class or lower income, never have no idea what something like that would even be or why. Um, the other thing I see a lot with clients is that they think marital agreements have to do with divorce, and that's it. And I think that there's so much broader than that. And something that you said earlier, Torri, is what I tend to talk to my clients about, and that is intentionality. Is the key here is to be intentional, and the practical reality is that when you have people come into a marriage with greatly disparate assets or with children or other things, there's complexities that don't necessarily come into play when you get married and you have no children and no assets. My wife and I, when we got married, we literally had $8 between us, and we just agreed if something ever happened, we'd split it. So we didn't have that question or concern, and the reality is um, that can put a great amount of pressure. And it not only can affect your relationship, it can also affect your relationship with the extended family who may have
Yep.
expectations. So,
S-
so,
David,
so with, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to interrupt and just close out the poll here and just let people know that we'll share
Yeah.
these findings. But I think what I'm looking at, and tell me if what you guys think, that, you know, it's coming up, right? The first question, evidence that sometimes, frequently, all the time, that's the vast majority of people who responded are saying yes. I'd be so curious why the NAs said it's not applicable, but that's another time. I love that in the education section, we're seeing that it's from early stage, almost 18% say starting to bring up in high school, whereas others are sort of bringing up it's happening, maybe when someone starts to date or later when an engagement is imminent. And then I love the last question shows that, 72% indicate both will benefit equally. So that's a great theme that Tori and I think will jump in to now. So I'm going to close out the poll. Thanks everybody for participating in that.
Yeah, David, I'll come back to what you just said. And I will say after our prep conversation, what I almost immediately did was go and look at our modules and say, did we surface that the intention of the document is really essential to overcoming some of those biases that this is about divorce? And I will say we do a pretty good job of it, right? That this is something that can be really loving and really intentional through all stages of life. And I will say from my personal experience, that's not how it was positioned. And so I love your positioning, and we have a number of experts who are in the course who, Lori Israel, for example, talks about like not prenups aren't for everyone. But I think when done with intent and done with love for the lifetime of the document, then maybe it is for everyone.
Yeah. And I think, uh, I don't know if you've ever seen those demotivator posters. They're kind of like the opposite of the motivational posters. And but one of my favorite, it's a picture of a snowflake, and it says, "Just like a snowflake, you're unique, just like everybody else."
Mhm.
And the reality is, there are general truisms when it comes to dealing with marriage and property and things like that. At the same time, each situation is unique. That's what makes us all the same, and how we approach that and how we deal with that. And so I think it would be great to get into here's general principles and here's what you need to think about. But I also think it's really helpful to start with what's an individual story and what's an experience that we've gone through. And I think you guys want to do this to not only take care of and provide resources through Tamarind, but also just to help people learn from your experience. And this is a personal thing to you. So maybe we could just start with Torri, if you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing your experience with premarital agreements, and talk about that for a bit, and then the same with Kirby, and then we could circle back to, okay, what are some things we learned from this, and what are some general principles as we approach these unique situations.
Perfect. That sounds good. So I'll start by saying I did this in probably the worst way possible. I got engaged very, very soon after my husband and I met. And in fact, on our first date, I knew that I already loved him. And I said, hey, just so you know, you're going to have to sign a prenup. And so just started right out of the gate. Like we barely knew each other. I went home that night. I told my dad I found the man I was going to marry. But was that the best approach? Maybe not.
So just over the bloomin' onion, you told him, hey, we got to get a prenup before you get to the or ordered your main dish.
Exactly right. His chicken tenders, my shrimp salad. I was like, hey, I know we just met, but I come from a pretty affluent family and no big deal. Don't ask any questions about that. You are going to have to sign a document. You want to get married. So pretty engaging first date.
Well, and I love the fact that he was like, yeah, that sounds good.
He was very good natured about it. He has been rolling with me all along, but I still wish we would have done it more intentionally and differently, I think, because there was a really wonderful opportunity to approach it with love. But because I was so young and no one had talked to me about it, I just went full guns blazing.
So okay, so you say, and I get that you didn't have a full understanding, but I mean, you knew enough walking into a first date. Prenup or premarital agreement had to have been in the nomenclature of the family to a certain extent. Maybe there were some expectations. Give us a background on that, because again, for most people, that's probably not a first date statement that you would make.
Yeah, and nor was it every first date. It was specific to my now husband of 10 years. So I will say this is our 10th wedding anniversary. So
Nice.
far, so good. But the lessons and the communications coming from my family were very, very sort of clear. And interestingly enough, where it really was coming from was my married in father, who married my mother, who was the moneyed partner. And he was very clear about if you do not get a prenup, you will never receive an inheritance. And whether that was factually accurate as it related to the estate plan, that was what was communicated sort of like out of a norm's perspective, because actually, as it turns out, he and my mom did not have a prenup. And when they got divorced, it caused a lot of sort of problems. And so that was a big lesson for me to say, I don't want to do it that way. And part of why I was so eager. I also was really eager, David, because I wanted to get it out there as soon as possible, like throw the grenade and then we'll see what happens. And again, I don't know if it was the best approach because I didn't know what that meant either.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, it's a lot better. Early in my practice, I had a client who he was the parent who kind of demanded the kids do a premarital agreement, and literally they came by my office, I think the day before the wedding, and this had not been brought up beforehand. Honestly, I don't know if it's even legally enforceable, and I told him that the day before the wedding. But it was a spouse who did not handle it near as well as yours, and was very difficult and very awkward for them as they came on board to this family. Hey, welcome to the family. We love you. We think you're amazing, and sign this 42-page document that she didn't necessarily fully understand. So the nice thing for you guys is that there was maybe a smooth path towards getting it done without fully understanding what it was. The other thing I think that's interesting is how much of our perspective on this is guided by our life experience. If your dad had had a different experience, if he hadn't been divorced, would he have still had the same perspective on this. And for you guys, it doesn't make it right or wrong to do it because of his experience, but his experience influenced tremendously how he addressed that with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that Kirby's going to speak this to this a little bit, but our sort of experience with our own counsel sort of shaped what the prenup was like as well, because I had sort of like our very comfortable family attorney. I could ask him questions. My husband, on the other hand, right, and we were young, we were very young, didn't have a lot of money. So, okay, go and spend your own money, get independent counsel. You have to do this. And what did that look like for him, right? Just Googling, Denver prenup attorneys and landing on someone. And, there was no mediator, there was no conversation. And what sort of resulted was my attorney was very, very clear on sort of my family situation and what was protected and, was protective. And then my husband's attorney on the other side of it was sort of responsive and tried to, claw things back and make sure that he was protected, which is the job of your attorney and your independent counsel. But we didn't start with intent. Like, really, the purpose of this was to protect my family's operating company, not to protect the assets that he and I brought together. And I will say that at 21, my assets were a string of pearls that I got for a high school graduation. My husband's was an Xbox and the stainless steel pot that still sits in our kitchen today. So
nice, nice, nice. Okay, so I want to get back to some of the things that you said first, but I'd love to switch to Kirby and tell us a little bit about your experience with marital agreements. You were on the other side of a marital agreement, which is a post-marital.
yeah.
But tell us a little bit about that experience and how it went for you and your spouse.
Sure. So my husband John and I had been married for 8 years. And during the time of our marriage, very interestingly, to juxtapose to Torri's situation, um, my family actually was like, "Oh, you're good. Your wealth and assets and family business interests are held in trust. You don't need to sign a prenup." So I was like, "Oh, that's such a gift, right? I don't have to worry about that conversation." And so we didn't have a prenup. And I was very confident that our ironclad trust would, be fine, and those wealth and interests in our businesses would, be covered by that. Well, John and I married from a community property state to a non-community property state. And during the time of our marriage, some of those closely held interests appreciated. And we had one significant exit of one of the businesses and pieces of property, which all of a sudden really materially changed the value of those interests in said trust. So now those trusts weren't ironclad when we moved to this different state. And estate planning council said, yes, you should really think about doing a postnuptial agreement, which I was like, sure, like that's fine, no problem. And was very naive and kind of like, of course, I'm business oriented. I should do this. And my husband, so sweet and very understanding, was like, yeah, no problem. We'll do that. Not a problem at all. And back to the sort of attorney theme, it's a lot of counsel, right? So estate planning counsel says you guys need to get each separate counsel. So then we had to go do an attorney search for each of us to be represented to this new agreement. We had to also sever, do a termination of marital assets and severance of community property assets. So all of a sudden, it's like real. And there's a lot, because similar to doing a prenup, you have to do a whole accounting, right, of now what your assets are at the time of your marriage. And we had to sever our joint community property assets and now title and say which is mine, which is yours. But also, the postnup is complicated because now you're like monetizing your marriage, right? You're in it. You're thinking about what did I bring? Where should the line be drawn between the two of us? And so I think what was also interesting is just the types of attorney referrals to my husband, who was the less endowed spouse, than to me. And so the experience went from being like naively, like not a big deal, we can handle this business relationship and work it out, to being quite honestly really toxic and adversarial. And it was strange for my husband and I because we went into it naively thinking like, oh, we'll just work this out, to having attorneys literally on opposite sides really angling for our quote best interests. And it got so toxic, honestly, that we ended up firing his attorney because it was not contributing towards a solution. And John and I took it offline and said, we need to work this out as a couple and get clear on what we agree with and don't agree with our attorneys, and then go back to one attorney to help us finalize. So even though we both had counsel at the beginning, we ultimately only worked with one counsel to finalize the postnuptial agreement and to get all the details worked out. But it was traumatic. And I bring this up because I wasn't prepared. No one informed me of the reality of this and also the reality that counsel would play.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I've seen that so much in my experience, because it's interesting when I do estate planning for couples. Generally, I represent both. We waive a conflict. There's joint representation. We don't keep secrets between each other and all of that. But when you have a marital agreement, that's not an agreement that an attorney can generally have, represent both sides. Normally, what will happen is each side will be represented by an attorney, and then you have their perspectives and their personalities that come into play. And I've done premarital agreements with attorneys who are great to work with and understanding, and then I've had others who are just very adversarial, more litigious in nature, seeking to try to establish value for what they do, or heaven forbid, running up billable hours to do it. One of the things that you said that I think is interesting is, that this attorney claimed to be acting in your best interest, but what interest? Was it just your financial interest, or was it your personal relational interest? Because it sounds like there was at least a period of time where this was some relational cost between you guys having to navigate this.
Well, my my attorney turned out to be the one who made it through the process. It was actually my husband's attorney that was really aggressive, very demanding, very forward. And then I'd go back to my husband and say, "Did you tell him to advocate for you on these fronts?" And he would be like, "No, he's just saying this is what I have to do to maximize, right? The most that you can get." Because again, you're thinking about what would the spouse receive upon your death to support your children. And again, now you're monetizing your children and like what goes to them versus what goes to your spouse to care for them. And I think what became very clear to me is that if you don't have a rock solid relationship, which we did, now we're 20, we crossed the 25-year-old marriage threshold, thank goodness. But I can imagine that for fragile marriages, this is like literally dropping the grenade, and can really poison what the bedrock of your relationship is if there isn't, you know, good counsel on that really understands what do you want to get out of this? What do you hope? What does success look like? And that's essentially what John and I did independently. Now, in hindsight, oh, if we had a mediator, oh, if we had a prenup, postnup expert, or even if our counsel was saying, hey, here's a worksheet, here's some ideas of things to think through and talk about. And again, I think to the spirit of why we're so passionate about preparing folks to have the right kinds of conversation, or even to know how to hire the right kind of counsel or mediator, like shoulda, woulda, coulda, right? Those are the lessons learned and that we would love for people to avoid.
Yeah, and I will just to echo something you said, and then I'd love to get into, what's a good framework for these agreements or how do we approach them. But one thing that you said, and that is, I've seen couples sign premarital agreements and never think about it again the rest of their lives. I've seen others where the lower the spouse with fewer assets always has felt during the whole course of the marriage it's been a burr in their side. It's been something that's caused anxiety. It's created an unequal yoking to a certain extent, and an insecurity. And honestly, I've seen some situations where I think marital agreements, premarital agreements, created marital issues that I'm not sure would have existed but for them. And so um, I always am a believer that you take good people in bad structures over bad people in good structures. You want both. But honestly, one of the things the through line that you guys were able to navigate these both well is you have great spouses who understood and you had a great relationship. Where I see it potentially causing problems is when you don't have that bedrock of such a great relationship. You don't have that connection, and now it's just one more thing that creates a level of instability. So with that, I want to just talk through some of the ways to think about or approach marital agreements, premarital, postmarital agreements. And I want to just throw out some things that we talked about before, but get your thoughts on it. And the first, and I think you both brought it up, but why are we doing a premarital agreement? What is the reason for it? And I think sometimes we don't actually articulate that. And when we fail to articulate that creates an issue. Is it to protect a family business? Is it because we come in with disparate assets? Is it because we have children from a prior marriage, which is one that I um, always want to make sure that we address. In those situations, I always ask clients, something happened to you. If you were to pass away, do you want to make sure your surviving spouse is cared for, or do you want to make sure your children aren't disinherited? And usually the answer is yes. I want to accomplish those, but talk either or both of you about just understanding why we're doing the agreement to begin with.
Yeah, Kirby, I'll jump in from my perspective because I think my family a little bit was doing it because that's what you're supposed to do. It's just something that, affluent families do is you have to protect those family assets. And so it really wasn't done, I think, very thoughtfully, at least in my case. And like I was sort of eager to do it as a young person because I was like, yeah, I have my life together. I'm gonna do this prenup agreement without having a lot of understanding. So I think sometimes I wonder if families are doing this well intentioned, but without understanding kind of the why behind it. And in my case, right, at the end of the day, those family business related assets were never on the table anyhow. And so, to your point, what you mentioned earlier is did this agreement cause friction for the sake of having a document that really, at this point is protecting the Xbox and the pearls as opposed to the family asset? And we, had shared assets together. We rented an apartment. We had nothing material to speak of. So I do think that there was the opportunity for us there to have a long view and talk about, if I pass away, what happens to you? And like I vaguely remember having some loose conversations around it, but it wasn't directed and it wasn't purposeful.
I actually think my experience, and this just came to me right at this moment, but because I was 7 years into a relationship, we'd been building our individual personal wealth, we had joint wealth, and then we had this complexity of like inherited assets on my side is probably more kindred to the people getting married in their 30s and 40s today. And I bring this up because I think your experience, Tori, is probably an outlier, right? We have people getting married much later. They're deferring having kids much later. We have 25% of the population who is child free, not wanting to have children. So there's like complicated fact patterns that people are bringing to a marriage situation today or cohabitation or whatever it looks like. And so my postnup is probably a little bit more kindred to today's prenup. And I had that naivete. Here I work in this space and I was not really thinking about, I was thinking like it was just a transactional conversation, not a big deal. But I didn't expect the emotional element of it and how actually unsettled it made both my husband and I feel because it was like relating to one another about quantifying love, quantifying a relationship, and I in my headset was like, oh, the intention is just around the business assets, and I think you can't really parse. I don't know that you can split it, and that's what if I could go back today, I would be going into it much more counseling others to think about the emotional aspects of what you feel connected to. And, one thing my husband and I got very clear on in the process was, boy, what came from the past and what appreciation to an asset from something I inherited had really no relevance to our marriage shared property. And so that became very easy for us to say, yeah, that should be on your side of the house and not something I should be touching. But I think there's other pieces where when you do a postnup, you're also envisioning you're getting divorced or you're getting separated. So that is another element of a postnup that felt very different when you're like in the beginning and like, oh, it's so fun. But when you're in a marriage trying to envision the end, that's another extremely emotional component that I wasn't prepared really until I got into those conversations. And it was something we had to like really work on after, like to rebuild some of these fragile sort of emotional parts of our relationship.
And that's part of why we partnered with Emily Bouchard on the Purposeful Prenup modules, because she had seen this go sideways as a family therapist a lot of times. And whether you were in my position and sort of going in with not a lot of assets, but then later on the road, things went sideways, or in your position, that this was, as you mentioned, David, an opportunity for things to go sideways. And so starting with, an intentional, here's how we talk about money. What are the ground rules as we talk about money? And the first module is really focused on these sort of like date night conversations that prepare you to go into the technical aspects of the prenup, which is what all the second module covers, right? Just sort of the more structural steps. Here's how to hire an attorney. Here's what goes into a financial disclosure, all of these other pieces. So I think in both of our cases, like, man, day and night, if we had had that groundwork of those sort of structured conversations about how do we want to approach this potentially fraught issue, because as David said, right, money is deep waters. Everybody, whether you are, living a very sort of average income life or you are living a very endowed life, you have feelings and experiences and emotions around money. So a prenup, by the nature of dealing with money, it's going to be fraught, or it has the opportunity to be fraught.
Yeah, and one thing, the importance of that understanding, and especially for you, and I think Torri, you alluded to this, but understanding the why can actually help you with the structure. So for a lot of my clients, the underlying why is, hey, we have a really closely held family business that we don't want to have subjected to a spousal claim or a threat of a divorce and losing some asset of the business. But if you understand that, then you can say, okay, well, maybe we just do a limited premarital agreement, one that's just is targeted to that specific issue. So instead of trying to deal with everything, let's just address the issue that comes into play. So for a lot of my clients, I try to focus on targeting the actual issue at play. So another example, like if it's okay, I'm worried that everything doesn't go to my spouse if I die, so because I've got minor children to take care of. So okay, well let's target it. Let's look at maybe we have something that protects those assets, but then let's get life insurance for the surviving spouse. Let's get life insurance for the minor children. Let's target and address the issue itself, as opposed to putting together a blanket 42-page premarital agreement that's actually just trying to address a single issue. Um, One thing I want to do, and I think it's so important to think through how we relate to this, but I do want to just spend a couple of minutes thinking about what if we are a third party to this. Let's put yourself in the position of your parents right now. Or I have a lot of clients who call me up and have those country club conversations that are, hey, I was talking to my friend and his kid just got married and he made him do a premarital agreement. Should I make all my kids do premarital agreements? They talk about this. As a parent, what's the best way to approach these things too? And one thing that struck out or stuck out to me when you were talking, Torri, is that not only did your dad tell you that you needed to do one, he also told you the consequence of not doing that. And that was that you would be disinherited. And I think that's one of the things I always try to let my clients know is if you have that expectation on a child, um, anytime you tell a child anything, regardless of the age, I don't care if they're 3 or 33, they're going to add 2 words to what you say, and that is, or what? You need to sign this premarital agreement, or what? And I've seen situations where parents have asked the children to do a premarital. The first child, the oldest child, responsible one, yes, I'll do it. They may take some relational hit with their kid. The second child comes along and says, no way am I forcing my spouse to do that. And then it's or what? Well, then I don't do anything. And now I've got an issue with my first child who said, geez, Dad, I went through some relational cost to do this, and my sibling didn't do it. And so now what? So I think that's one of those that, as the third party, we need to be really thoughtful and careful before we're asking or demanding or forcing those children to do that. And I don't know if in your family that was taken different than you took it too, right? Like you went along with that. But what if you are a sibling or a child who's a little more disagreeable or a little more defiant and doesn't do it? Then what happens? Are we really cutting them out of the will if they won't?
Yeah, and one of the opportunities that I really see is if you are a parent or you are an advisor who is navigating prenups or postnups with a young person or someone more established is, and this comes up in Tamarind Learning all the time, right? That all of these are opportunities for parents and advisors and trusted folks in a young person's life to have an educational conversation. Here's why we're doing this. Here's what you want. Like, how does that feel to you? What do you think it means? Where do you think this is going to show up as a landmine? How can I support you? Here are the people to talk to, as opposed to just throwing the grenade or the landmine or talking about it really negatively, right? So I want to really emphasize that if you want to force this on your kids, at least use it as a launch pad for conversations. And it's going to become a launch pad either way, as we see in financial disclosure. It is not uncommon for a, more endowed partner to find out that they are worth significantly more than they realized or they understood in that financial disclosure process. So, don't, as the parent, create a can of worms that you're not ready to address.
Yeah, I think
I
that's such a good point.
I was just going to add too that I think we talk about this in the module with Emily about how many myths there are. And I loved in our poll that most of you felt like it benefits both parties equally, because quite honestly, if you think about a prenuptial agreement, that is actually usually when you're at your happiest, right? You're at your peak of like, oh, this is so wonderful to be together. Granted, you might be naive, might not be super well schooled on this topic, but you're going to give the benefit of the doubt, the endowed partner, to the other one more likely than not. And so you're talking about making an agreement when you're very agreeable. You're not in an adversarial role. And I see so many families, even in my own family, where a prenup was not executed. And now, when you're trying to make these discernments, you're not in an agreeable place and you're not being as kind to one another because you're not so happy about something ending. And I think that's the other cold reality of maybe you think a trust protects you and you don't need to have this, but the reality is, oftentimes it can be really advantageous when things don't turn out as well. And I think, again, to trust, yes, they can be a valuable layer of protection, but educate your family member that where you live really matters jurisdictionally to how your estate plan holds up and that trust holds up, because that's where we don't, again, educate and prepare those beneficiaries. It doesn't work if you're in California and you go somewhere like New York. Like these things happen all the time where community property states are scattered throughout our whole country, United States. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. Well, good. I know we could keep talking and talking about this subject, but maybe just one rapid fire question for each of you, and then we can hit the work on wrap up. But what's one thing you guys both successfully navigated these things? But what's one thing you do differently?
One thing I would do differently is slow down, and not just sign the document to sign the document, to do this as something that is a launching point for a lifetime together.
Yeah, one thing I would do differently is be more educated with my attorney about how to have the pre-conversation with my spouse before getting counsel involved. Again, had there been a checklist, had there been date nights like we've set up for Tamarind Learning's prenup course, I know we would have had much more efficient and productive conversations and not burned so much attorney time too, going back and forth.
I thought you were going to say, don't, I would have not moved to a community property state.
Well, I originated in a community property state, so
Oh,
I
okay.
couldn't have changed that. It was actually that document didn't hold up when I moved out of a community
Uh,
property state.
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I
good.
just want to bring up that we had one module starting in December. We actually are launching a second module to be a companion to Emily Bouchard's masterclass. The second module is going to be much more technical. And Tori, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can talk a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, and it's really actually all about demystifying the process for both partners. Creating that roadmap, you stop with Emily's course, and it's purposeful and it's wonderful, but then the so what? So we've just demystified everything from how do you source an attorney, what questions do you ask when you hire an attorney or a mediator? Do you need an attorney or a mediator? What's the role of independent counsel? We talk about asset disclosure, for example, and we speak to, where do you even find those documents? So Kirby rose the really great point of look at your credit report, do a state search. So we have, just like in the first module, a really structured date night approach to this to keep intentionality, to keep purpose, but also, okay, now you have to draft this document. Here is sort of the guided process. You won't have a prenup at the end of it. You're going to have everything you need, though, sort of to think through what it looks like once you hire counsel and you start drafting and negotiating. So we also speak to normalizing the negotiation process. So really sort of from start to finish, all the checkpoints along the way. If you are interested in that course, there is a coupon code for it, and it's bundled up just in time for Valentine's Day here. So bundled up 26 is going to give you two for the price of one. So you're going to get both modules for the price of Emily's module as well. And we just ask for you to give us feedback. We hope you love it. We hope you find it useful as well. And we'll follow up with all that information in an email as well as include the recording.